Welcome, dear listeners. Settle close as shadows deepen. Tonight's tales twist from the darkest corners of your own mind. Monsters you've imagined, they stir. Thank you for trusting us to guide you deeper. Each story chills more than the last. Find Extended Nightmares on Patreon. Story 1. Boogeymen are born from normal people. People who have let the evil enter and break their mindset starts with seemingly innocent bad thoughts. Someone has let their dog beep in your front yard, and you half-jokingly wish they were hit by a bus you newborn son. Can T get a whole night of sleep? You love him, but you wish just a little bit that he didn't exist. You look at your boss, yelling at you for being late and sleep deprived, and imagine yourself twisting his neck very, very slowly until he cannot breathe. You sometimes feel a lack of memory, like some minutes went by and you didn't even notice, or someone had a whole conversation with you that you can't remember, but you blame it to your stress and bad sleeping. Your boss is putting you through a lot. This week your neighbors don't say good morning to you anymore. Even the over-friendly neighbor is different. He timidly waves at you, but in a colder way. You say something that sounds normal to you when you re-mad, but the whole room is looking at you like you re-crazy the water, and the foods start to taste weird, and the smell, the sulfuric smell, will never leave your nostrils anymore, although no one else feels it, like your very soul is rotten. You go to the doctor, and with a shaky voice he asks that you never come back again. He won't tell you what you have. He didn't even charge you. You suspect the smell comes from inside. So there's no amount of baths and lotions that can solve it. You go to churches and temples and synagogues and mosques, but no one can help you. No one can find what's wrong. There's no devil, no vengeful spirit. The poison is in your very being. You realize nothing of it can ever go away again. You only had to feed beep it beep once or twice before beep it beep learned to feed beep it beep self on you. You find yourself in the middle of the night in the living room. You don't remember getting there. You fully dressed, covered in sweat, and holding a butcher knife in your hand. There's no blood, but it beep could beep have been bloodied moments ago. The next day, you watch and read the local news, praying that none of the vicious actions they describe are yours. You start a diary, because that's what people descending into madness do. They write to document their decay, but when you try to write, you notice you have no control over your hand anymore. You write what beep it beep wants, not what you intended to. You know beep it beep craves violence, unspeakable acts that make your stomach churn. So you lock yourself. You know you dangerous, and others will be safer without you around. But beep it beep controls your every move, so it unlocks all the big padlocks, every night that the reason you can't die. You re not in control of your body anymore. You re locked outside of yourself. Beep it beep has taken over you, re not you anymore. Your friends abandon you. Your family despises you. Your eyes hurt, and you hate the light. Your fingers are numb. Everything is numb, because your body isn't yours anymore. Maybe humanity. Greatest fears of all are being forgotten, being misunderstood, and powerlessness. And you get to experience all of them at once. What you used to be the real you no longer exists in other people's memories. Your loved ones suppressed every good time they had with you and replaced any fond recollection of you by fearing what you are now. You must be left behind, because now you re-beep it beep, and beep it beep is evil. You try to explain beep it beep is not you, but your body won't obey you. You re-finally kicked out of your shell, and now you re just a disembodied shadow, living under some kid's bed. /beep, /beep, /beep. I don't know for sure how I ended up there. Everything was foggy and felt like nothingness. I was a shadow, could only move across the shadows. So I stayed under the bed or in the closet a lot, despite having lost everything. At least I felt safe for the first time in a while. I have no idea how long it took for me to be noticed. I tried to keep track of the time based on how many times the boy came to sleep above me, but I kept forgetting. I wanted to retain whatever information I could, but a shadow has no memory, so I don't really know. Is anyone there? He asked. I don't know if I had seen him before that day or not, whether he was thin or chubby, or the color of his hair. I just remember thinking that, judging by his voice, he wasn't older than 8. He noticed me amazed by having my existence acknowledged. I tried to talk, to tell him it was lonely and dusty and maddening to be what I was, something next to nothing. I was like a phantom limb of a mind, and even thought it couldn't technically ache. It did, and it was excruciating. I wanted and desperately needed to tell someone about it. Of course, I had no vocal cords. Beep, I didn't even have a body or an entire mind. Everything came out as a terrifying growl. And kids can hear it. The boy screamed for his mom. I cowered in the darkest shadows as she came, sleepy and grumpy, and turned on the light. I heard something under the bed. He whimpered. She checked on me, even though I didn't have eyes. I could somehow see her with my battered half-mind. She was older, probably in her mid-40s. She wasn't mad or unkind, just exhausted. There's nothing here, sweetie. Wanna come to my room? Mom is really tired today. The boy agreed. I envied him. I wish more than anything that I had comforting arms to fall on and rest. /beep, /beep, /beep I. Didn't he have a lot of story with this boy? Or at least can't he remember? He frightened easily so. No matter how much I wanted to communicate with someone, I refrained from scaring him. I guess I am just bad at everything, including at being a Boogeyman. I heard conversation around the house, but for a long time it was just the boy and his mother. I rarely ventured outside the bedroom, afraid there wouldn't he be enough shadows for me to come back before morning. I was completely sure that I was going to disappear if I stepped into the light hand, even though everything was so bad I wanted to exist. So I was afraid, and cautious the house was too big for only 2 people. I eventually learned that the mother had an older daughter. She apparently was in college and was the most frequent visitor. The daughter was a joyous young woman. I really liked when she was around. I wish she was younger so she could hear me. She felt like she could bear to listen to my awful cries and not be scared, even when she was small as the boy aged. I understood that he couldn't hear me anymore, so sometimes I would talk aloud and make those awful noises just because I could, just to remember myself that I was still clinging to existence. The zenith of my life with the boy was when I learned that I could manipulate objects to some extent if I really focused. Right before he decided to move to the larger bedroom his sister used to occupy, he was a preteen by that time, and I heard him pacing around the room looking for something. I didn't really understand what it was, but it was some sort of memento of his late father. It was important then. I saw once again. I use this term very loosely. Something shiny close to me, under the bed. It was a reliquary, one of those you wear around your neck. I really wished that I could give it to him in that moment. Really wished then it happened. Slowly but surely the thing moved. The boy sounded so relieved and happy. When he finally found it, with my happy eye felt accomplished for the first time in my life as a Boogeyman. /beep, /beep, /beep. The next few years are a blurry of waiting and lurking around cautiously now. We Boogeymen can only move on shadows, but we can't squeeze through the cracks of windows or under doors. If I am being scientific, we read more like a slime made of shadow. That sy. No matter how much I considered relocating to another house and trying to talk to other children, it wasn't easy. I was stuck with a teenager and a middle-aged woman who couldn't hear me then. The boy went to college too, and it was only me and the mother for a while. Not even the older daughter would come. It was boring and lonely, after making a painstaking effort to remember, I finally recalled the daughter and the mother having a huge fight over the character of her boyfriend. I just don't know when it was I was almost making up my mind about going through the risks to find another place when the mother started renovating the bedroom I lived in. The bed above me, now painted white and with pink sheets, was going to have a new occupant the day the daughter came back, was full of tears. She cried, apologizing to her mother, while the older woman kept telling her that there was nothing to worry, and that despite everything, she was really happy she was now a grandmother. /beep, /beep, /beep. I, too, could barely contain my excitement. Lisbeth, the granddaughter, was a cute little thing. I think she was around 4 when they arrived. She sounded delighted with her new bedroom both. Her mother and grandmother put her to bed that night. She asked to sleep with all the lights turned off like a big girl. Chuckling, they complied and closed the door in total darkness. Of course, the 2 adults had a lot of talk after all these, I suppose, years. Hey, little monster, I know you re in there. I am not afraid of you, she stated. If I could smile, that's what I would have done, but I didn't say anything. I was unsure whether she really felt my presence, or just assumed there would be a monster. This was an opportunity too precious to be ruined. I didn't want to scare her off on the first day and lose her company. Seriously, little monster, knock if you re in there. I made whatever sound I could. She laughed in delight after that. We developed our system to communicate. I would make 1 noise for yes, and 2 noises for no. Lisbeth asked me all sorts of things, silly things from her little kid universe, like if I thought her doll was pretty, or if she should wear blue socks instead of white, things about her family, if I knew her uncle who lived in this room before, if her mother was beautiful, if I could go to her dad's house and hunt him. I replied everything, overjoyed to feel important and heard. Do you have big, scary eyes? Beep, no beep. Do you have nice eyes, then? Beep, no beep. Are you eyeless? Beep, yes beep, ooh-oh. That is scary, but not for me. Don't worry, Poggy. Beep, yes beep. And I still don't know why she nicknamed me Poggy. Do you have hands? Beep, no beep. That must be hard, Poggy. So you have paws. Beep, no beep. It's really hard to imagine you. Can I see you pretty, please? I swear I want to tell Mom or Nana. Beep, no beep, aw. Are you ashamed? Beep, no beep. She was deep in thought for a long time. Ooh-oh. So are you invisible? Beep, yes beep. That is so cool. Once again, she was quiet. I thought she was asleep. Can you move things? /beep, /beep, /beep. After learning that I could move things, Lisbeth came up with more ways to communicate. She would put many small objects under the bed, and depending on what I moved, I could answer things like probably, I don't know, etc. That improved our communication. A lot. We talked for hours and hours every day, despite being limited by her youth. She was a very clever girl. She was able to ask me a chain of questions that led her to conclude that I had been human before this fact seemed to scare her. She then asked if her mother or grandmother could become Boogeyman to Beep. I don't think so, Bep. I replied, moving a little replica of a racing car when she ran out of questions to ask me. She would ask her mom and Nana, Beep, what do you ask someone when you want to know them better? Beep, luckily, they thought it was cute. They thought I was Lisbeth's imaginary friend, and well, I was. I never meant to harm or scare her. Ask their profession, and if they have kids, her mother replied. Lisbeth came back happily, and for a long time she tried to guess what I worked with: firemen, policemen, teacher, scientist, astronaut, doctor, lawyer, nurse, actor, the person who gives you a happy meal in the mall, gardener, cleaning lady, lunch lady. To all of them, I replied no. She wasn't disappointed, though just more fired up. I was a mere office worker, something kids never think of because it's not glamorous or close to their reality. Mom, tell me a profession. A teacher. No. I already asked if Poggy is a teacher. When Lisbeth asked secretary, I finally said yes. Close enough. Do you have kids? Beep, yes, Beep. Are they like you? Beep, no, Beep. Do you love them? Beep, yes, Beep. And they love you? Beep, I don't know, Beep, sorry. Poggy, you re my friend, and I love you. \beep, \beep, \beep. I think I spent a year or so with Lisbeth. She healed my soul, if I had a soul to heal. No one had ever been that kind. To me, I know it as my fault, that I let it beep in, and corrupt my very being. But I felt that if I had been treated so well before, I would have never allowed it to happen for the people in the house. Life went on. Lisbeth's mother started dating another guy, someone the grandmother adored, so he was always there. The place was lively. It almost felt like we were all one big happy family. I didn't exact sleep, but I had some sort of dormancy period daily. I was abruptly awakened with the sound of someone entering the bedroom. I think it was from the window. A tall figure violently took Lisbeth from her bed, making her whimper, still in her sleep. It then moved to another room, Lisbeth in their arms, not turning on the lights, distressed. I followed. We entered the third bedroom. I immediately moved to under the bed. You beep beep. The person barked, turning on the lights. Lisbeth S. mother and her boyfriend were beep awake. Luke, for Christ's sake, what you redoing? Dad. Both sounded incredibly scared. Lisbeth had told me a lot about her father, even in her childish words. I was able to imagine a world of pain and fear. Lisbeth S. mother put up with a lot of verbal and physical violence. Ashamed to admit that her marriage was a huge mistake. Beep. I heard Dad screaming to Mom a lot and breaking things. But he was nice to me. He told me she had been naughty, so he had to ground her. I believed him at first, but Mom wasn't naughty. She was good. She brought me here the day Dad hurt me, and told me he never let her talk to my Nana before. Beep. Lisbeth S. mother sobbed. Luke was pointing a gun to his own daughter's head. How dare you sleep with another man? You beep beep. You re my wife. I'll never give you up, he yelled. We re coming back home now. Lisbeth S. mother started moving meekly towards him, crestfallen and humiliated. Her boyfriend motioned to stop her, but Luke spoke again. Come on, you beep beep. You either obey your husband and be punished for your unfaithfulness, or your life will be a living beep, knowing that your daughter died because of you. Dad, please. It hurts. Lisbeth pleaded, the metal barrel glued to her little forehead. My heart ached. Everyone was so scared. The room was so bright. I'd try to help anyone in that situation. Anyone but the sweet little girl who made me feel someone again, who healed me, who gave me hope and reason to exist. You can bet I'd give everything to save her, including what little of me still hadn't evaporated. So I wished with all my might that I moved the gun, and my non-body, the slime of darkness that I was, jumped towards the light. It felt like I was a sieve, with light perforating every pore that I didn't have. It hurt, but it also felt liberating, like I had finally atoned for my sins and was free, choosing to sacrifice happily for something that was worth all that I had. I was fast. A flash of dark in the light. I was able to move the pistol from his hand, causing it to pirouette. Hit him in the head. With the butt of the gun before disappearing, I saw his body starting to fall unconscious, almost in slow motion, and I heard Lisbeth S. frenetic voice. Poggy saved us. /beep, /beep, /beep. I abruptly woke up back in my own body. Like when you dream of falling. Beep, it beep was gone. Or at least I couldn't hear beep, its beep, malicious thoughts. Any more. I tried, moving my hands, slowly, finger by finger. Everything worked. I laughed with joy. I almost couldn't believe my luck. I thought I was gone forever. I opened my eyes and saw my husband by my side. I smiled happily, opening my arms to hug him. Instead, he looked scared and twitched, moving to the farther side of the bed. I am so sorry. Did I snort? I should sleep in the guest S room. But you insist, babe. It is fine. It is me. I tried to explain with the softest voice I could, but his eyes were full of panic. He was so washed out, pale, thin, and with swollen eyes, like he spent most of his life crying. He probably did. Considering what Beep It Beep kept talking about doing, and he looked old. Really, really old. I was ready to dismiss everything as some sort of drug-induced dream. But clearly years had passed based on Lisbeth S. uncle. At least a decade. I instinctively looked at the corner of our room, where the crib of our newborn used to be. But there was nothing. The room was arranged somewhat differently too. Where are the kids? I asked, still looking terrified. He guided me to their rooms. Please don't be so harsh, Rachel. I know they didn't mean to say your cooking was bad. He begged me. My newborn was now a handsome 12-years-old little man. I cried as I hugged him for the first time in so long. Being a Boogeyman was so scary, but nothing is scarier than being back and having to pick up the pieces that Beep It Beep left. Nothing is scarier than knowing how hard it will be to be trusted and loved again. Still, I am grateful I am here. I want to spend the rest of my days redeeming myself with the ones I love for everything Beep It Beep did through my body. While I was almost too far gone in a dark, dark place. Story 2. From an early age, I was told my father had built me, and that I was built to help the family. Any feelings or thoughts that differed from his programming were to be reported to him as a malfunction that he would fix. It didn't take me long to associate malfunctions with pain, and I reported them less and less. Over the years I slept in the basement in a box with a thin layer of foam and a pillow. I didn't go to school. I didn't know school even existed. My education, if you can call it, that was a list of books on topics to upload. Most of these books were on topics useful to my parents, such as basic plumbing and electrical work, cooking, gardening, and those written by my father on my programming. My mother would then give me a list of questions to answer about these books to ensure the upload was successful. Sometimes the questions would be tricks, or I would answer them incorrectly in the eyes of my outraged father. My uploads were almost always successful. I had nothing time, and the intense fear of corrupting my processors if I didn't properly concentrate writing this now. So many years later, it does sound ridiculous. But as a child unexposed to the world, I only had my parents to guide me. Between uploads and maintenance, I had tasks to complete. This included mowing the lawn, tending the garden, cooking meals, cleaning and fixing things such as lawn mowers, washing machines, dryers, and fridges. There was no downtime. I always had broken things to fix. I later found out my father would sell these once I had fixed them. When I was 17 years old, my father had to stop work and decided it was time for me to earn some money. The thought scared me, but I obeyed orders as I had been programmed to do. My father would send me to do cash jobs, mowing lawns, and doing general yard work. He would usually wait in the car until I was done or leave, and come back. If no one was home during these times, he would put me on mute mode and said that he would know if I spoke with anyone. It was forbidden. If I malfunctioned, there would be serious consequences. No one ever approached or spoke with me, even if they had arrived home before my father returned. They would make their way inside without a word. I discovered later that he had told his clients I was deaf and mute and liked to be left alone to finish the job. It was simple. He would drop me off on a large property. I would do my job and we would leave. One day I was mowing a regular's house. No cars were in the driveway, so my father left me to do the job. Shortly after, a girl came out with a drink. She looked the same age as me, and for a moment I considered she may be an android too. It is pretty hot outside. I thought you might want this, she said, handing me a black drink. It's Pepsi. I hope that's okay, she smiled. I had no idea what Pepsi was. It was black, like the oil mother made me drink. So I thought it should be okay. I still remember that first sip. It was the single greatest thing I had tasted. It didn't leave my mind feeling scrambled like my mother's drink. I wanted to ask what Pepsi was, where she got this drink from. Did she make it? I haven't seen you around. What school did you go to? Pepsi girl asked. I put my head down and walked back to my mower. What was I supposed to do? You were not even going to say thank you, she said, following me. I looked back at her. She made me nervous for reasons I was yet to know about. I have to work, I replied to her. Without another word, she huffed and walked away. I spent the rest of the day counting down the minutes until my father came to pick me up. I was convinced they would know I had gone off mute, that I had spoken to someone when my father's dusty red wagon pulled up. I loaded my gear into the car and got in. No words were spoken. I felt a small sense of relief, but a small voice in the back of my head spoke to me. Beep, he may not know now, but wait till you get home, Beep. Nothing was out of the usual that night. I did my chores, worked on my uploads, and recharged my batteries. The rest of the week was business as usual. My father was in one of his moods that lasted from days to weeks. The longer the mood, the more aggressive he would get with me. The small voice in the back of my head spoke to me once more. Beep, maybe he really doesn't know. Maybe he is lying, Beep, once this seed had been planted. Over the next few months, its roots took hold of me the rare moments I was left alone. I did something I'd never done before. I watched TV, though, usually on mute. And in short intervals, I started seeing images of the outside world. Happy families, cartoons and animals. It was mesmerizing and terrifying at the same time. The day that changed my life, however, was the day I turned on the TV and caught a glimpse of Beep I, robot Beep, real androids that had sown real doubts within me, though. I knew something was inherently wrong about my situation. I didn't know what to do. Eventually, I was sent back to Pepsi Girl's house and got to work. I was really hoping she would bring me some more, but didn't he get my hopes up? I was almost done mowing the lawn when she pulled into the property. I watched her drive up to the house and get out. A part of me screamed to talk to her. I thought of the scenarios carefully. 1. I would find out the truth about myself too. She may tell my father, and my malfunction would need to be fixed. 3. I might get Pepsi. I caught her at the door, almost out of breath from running, and she turned to look at me with a glare. Am I an android? Father says I am an android. I blurted out, Android. She asked, raising her eyebrows. I told her everything that IV told you, and about the movie ID scene with real androids. She stood quietly. I guessed she was trying to make sense of it all. I heard footsteps behind me and immediately lost all my courage. My father said nothing and grabbed my arm, pulling me away. I looked back at her, still with the same perplexed look she wore when I first approached her. Beep. I had blown it. Beep. That night was the worst night of my life. The fixing my father did was worse than ever before, and now I knew. Beep, I am something. I am someone. Beep, the seams were splitting. My father no longer bothered with the usual half-assed facade that had become so apparent to me now. It was just straight punishment. Both my parents tried scaring me, telling me stories of police and the outside world. They were both furious, but also shaken. I wasn't allowed out of the basement after that. The days passed slowly, and my parents' screaming matches were the only form of stimulation I had. I would put my ear to the door to try hear what they were saying. One sentence drove fear into me that I didn't know I had. I am going to shut it down for good. I was that it. I heard someone coming down the steps and fled from the door. My father pushed it open, but stayed outside. I stared at him from across the room, uncertain of what I was supposed to do. He threw a shovel into the room, and it clanged against the floor, breaking the silence. "Come," he said, motioning me out of the room. I obeyed his commands and was led into the backyard. We walked further out onto the property before he ordered me to dig a hole. "What am I digging for?" I asked him. What the beep is with all these questions. What happened to you? I didn't program you right. My father had to be in his 60s at least. But this shriveled up man still terrified me. "Are you going to shut me down?" "Yeah, that is right. Gonna shut you down and get a new one. One that can keep its beep mouth shut." A half smile appeared on father's face. As if satisfied with himself, that smile beeped me off. That man beeped me off as much as he scared me. I thought of what I was missing, though I didn't even know what I was missing apart from the magical world. I had put together through the TV shows I'd seen. I thought of Pepsi Girl. I thought of the beep Pepsi. And then all the pain this man had caused me. I clenched the shovel and swung at him, connecting with the side of his face. The sound rung out into the night, but no part of me was sticking around to enjoy it. My father hit the ground, and I started running. There was no plan. I hadn't intended for this to happen, and had no clue where I was going, or where I should be going after cutting through a few properties. I finally stopped running. I collapsed into some tall grass and caught my breath. The stars were beautiful. It was the first time I'd be out at night on my own. And despite the fear and uncertainty, it was the most beautiful night of my life. I decided I would go to Pepsi Girl's house. I knew it was close and had an idea of where it was. I continued walking and found myself at the driveway just as the sun was coming up. I knocked on the door until a worried man came out to greet me. I told him everything I'd told his daughter, and he believed me. Beep, thank beep. He believed me beep. The police arrived at the house to find my father with a gun in his mouth. He had already disposed of my mother. They told him to put it down, but he pulled the trigger, and it was over. Over for them, but not for me. My life was just beginning. It was revealed to me that they weren't really my parents. They had stolen me, stolen my childhood, my mind. And at times I wonder if they just might still steal my sanity. Thank Beep for Malfunction's note. Thank you, Gary, Emily, and Grace. Thank you. Story 3. The silence out here isn't empty. It is occupied. That was the first thing Elias learned after 2 weeks alone at Sentinel Point Lighthouse, perched on a jagged fist of rock 3 miles off the storm-lashed coast. The crumbling Victorian structure wasn't just remote. It was a deliberate exile. Elias, a reclusive artist seeking the ultimate solitude to finish his magnum opus, had bartered 6 months of caretaking for the privilege. No phone signal, no boat service until spring. Just Elias, the groaning tower, the endless gray-green churn of the Atlantic, and the silence at first. The solitude was bliss. The rhythmic crash of waves against the rocks was a lullaby. The salt-stung air cleared his head. He painted obsessively, capturing the bleak beauty of the place, the way the fog clung like wet wool. The skeletal remains of shipwrecks visible at low tide. The lighthouse beam cutting through the perpetual twilight gloom like a cold, white finger. He meticulously logged the daily weather in the keeper's ledger. A ritual that anchored him. The shift was subtle. It started with the feeling of being watched. A prickling sensation between his shoulder blades whenever he stood on the narrow, wind-scoured gallery and circling the lantern room. He'd whip around, heart hammering, but find only the swirling mist and the indifferent sea. He blamed it on isolation, the mind playing tricks in the void. Then came the sounds, not the familiar groans and sighs of the old structure settling against the gale. These were misplaced. A soft, wet clicking, like knuckles cracking underwater, seeming to come from the spiral staircase just behind him. A sigh that wasn't the wind, breathed against the back of his neck when he was hunched over his sketches in the cramped living quarters below. He'd freeze, brush trembling, the hairs on his arms standing rigid, turning slowly. He'd find only the empty room, the single oil lamp casting frantic, leaping shadows on the damp stone walls. The silence afterward felt heavier, denser, like something was holding its breath just beyond the lamplight. Sleep became fractured. He'd jolt awake in the pitch-black hours before dawn, convinced he'd heard footsteps on the metal stairs outside his bolted door. Not the heavy tread of a man, but something lighter, yet infinitely more deliberate. Scrape, pause, as if something was testing each step, learning the way. He'd lie rigid, sweat chilling on his skin, straining to hear over the roar of his own blood. The footsteps never reached the door. They always stopped halfway. The silence that followed was worse. A listening silence. The environment itself seemed to turn against him. The fog grew thicker, clinging to the windows like a blindfold. muffling even the crash of the waves into a dull, ominous thud. It felt alive, invasive. One morning, he found damp footprints on the floorboards leading from the seaward door, small, bare feet, slightly webbed, trailing seawater, and something dark, viscous, that smelled of brine and deep, forgotten places. He scrubbed them frantically, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Wind patterns, tide surge, he tried to rationalize. But the prints were inside, and the heavy door had been bolted, shut. The Lighthouse, Keeper S. logbook, became his only confidant. His neat entries grew shaky, stained with spilled coffee and sweat. Equals Oct 17th. Gale force 8. Tower groaning like a dying thing. Heard the clicking again, loud. From the service room. Door was locked. Checked. Nothing. Equals Oct 19th. Fog like soup. Can't see the gallery rail. Found marks on the lower gallery door, like scratches. Deep. Metal. Not human. Equals Oct 21st. Woke to whispering. Not words. Just sibilance. Like waves on shingle. But inside the walls. Everywhere. Couldn't he find the source? Bolted myself in the lantern room for hours. Beam felt weak. Insufficient. The silence wasn't just absence anymore. It was a presence. A suffocating weight that pressed in from all sides, amplified by the relentless isolation. He started talking aloud to himself, just to break it. But his voice sounded thin, alien, and seemed to make the listening silence lean closer. Was he losing his mind? Was the crushing solitude conjuring phantoms? Or was something out there, in the fog and the deep water, drawn to his isolation like a beacon? The uncertainty gnawed at him. A rat in the walls of his sanity then. The water turned. The large cistern collecting rainwater, his only source of fresh water, developed a faint, briny odor. A slick, iridescent film floated on the surface. He strained it, boiled it furiously. But the taste remained a subtle tang of the sea, and something else, something decaying. Paranoia flared. Had something gotten in? Was it poisoning him? He rationed the remaining bottled water. His throat perpetually dry, adding dehydration to his growing list of torments one night. During a lull in the storm, the fog parted momentarily. Elias stood on the gallery, shivering in the biting wind, gazing at the impossible vastness of the ocean under a sliver of moon. Below, on the treacherous rocks, usually submerged, he saw movement, not seals, shapes, low, hunched, glistening wetly in the moonlight. They moved with an unnatural, scuttling gait, converging towards the base of the lighthouse. One paused, looked up. Elias couldn't see features, only the suggestion of a pale, elongated face, reflecting the cold beam of the lighthouse. It raised a limb too long, too jointed, and pointed directly at him. He stumbled back inside, slamming the heavy iron door, fumbling with the bolts. His heart felt like it would burst. They were real. They were here. The isolation, wasn't just intensifying his fear. It was the trap. There was no escape, no help. He was utterly, completely alone with them. The next day, the final blow fell. He opened the logbook. Needing the ritual, needing proof, he wasn't entirely mad. The pages he meticulously filled were altered beneath his entry from October 21st, written in a cramped, spidery hand that mimicked his own, but subtly wrong, too angular. Too wet-looking were new words. He paints the light, but the dark paints him. We watch the watcher. The silence is hungry. It tastes of salt and solitude. Soon, the door one matter. The words swam before his eyes. He hadn't written that. He couldn't have written that. Yet the ink matched his own. The implication was a cold knife twisting in his gut. It wasn't just outside. It wasn't just the fog or the sea. The malevolence was inside. It had been inside the whole time. In the silence. In the walls. In the water he drank. It had been learning him, mimicking him. Waiting within the very isolation, he backed away from the desk. Knocking over his chair, the lighthouse groaned. A deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the stone floor, from the spiral staircase, barely audible over the sudden howl of the wind outside, came the sound again. Scrape, pause, scrape closer this time. Much closer Lias ran, not towards the bolted seaward door, but up the spiraling metal stairs, past the living quarters, past the service room, towards the only light he knew, the great, rotating lens in the lantern room. He burst through the hatch, gasping, slamming it shut behind him, and jamming a metal rod through the handles. The wind screamed through the gaps in the glass, making the massive lens assembly hum with a low, mournful note. The beam swept out, cutting through the fog. A futile gesture against the encroaching dark, he pressed his back against the cold glass, staring at the hatch. Below, the scraping stopped. Silence descended, thick and expectant. Then, a new sound, a soft, wet tapping against the hatch door, gentle, insistent, like fingernails or something harder, more chitinous, and then a voice, his own voice, but distorted, echoing as if from the bottom of a well, laced with the gurgle of seawater. Elias it sighed, a perfect mimicry of his own weary tone. The light is cold. Let us in. We be so lonely. The beam swept around. illuminating the swirling fog outside, revealing nothing but the endless, hungry sea inside the lantern room, surrounded by glass and howling wind. Elias realized the ultimate horror. He hadn't been running to the light. He'd been running into the cage. The lighthouse wasn't his sanctuary. It was their larder, and the silence, the vast, consuming silence of Sentinel Point, wasn't empty at all. It was full, and it was coming for him, wearing his own voice, dripping with the saltwater solitude he once sought. The tapping on the hatch grew louder, more rhythmic, a dreadful countdown. The beam swept out again. A cold, white eye scanning the desolation, revealing nothing at all. Story 4. The silence in the old Victorian wasn't peaceful. It was a held breath. Evelyn had thought it charming when she inherited it from great Aunt Miriam. All creaking floorboards and leaded windows that warped the world outside. Perfect for a historian specializing in forgotten local tragedies. Quiet, solitary. Now, after 3 months, the quiet pressed in like wet cotton wool, dense and muffling, and the solitude had curdled into something. Watchful it began subtly. A misplaced pen, a book found open on a page. She didn't recall reading. The faint scent of violets, Aunt Miriam's perfume, lingering in a room long aired out. Evelyn chalked it up to stress. The lingering grief over Miriam's sudden passing. The sheer volume of dusty documents she was cataloging. Her headaches started shortly after, localized behind her right eye. A persistent, low thrum like a faulty wire buzzing in the wall. Then came the distortion she'd glance at her reflection in the beveled glass of the hallway mirror, and swear her eyes were fractionally too far apart, or her mouth stretched wider than it should be when she wasn't smiling. Once, while transcribing a particularly grim account of a 19th century factory fire, she looked down at her hand, gripping the pen, and saw the skin ripple like disturbed water. For just a second, she dropped the pen, heart hammering against her ribs. Stress, she told herself firmly, massaging her temples. Too much coffee, not enough sleep. Sleep became treacherous. The house groaned and settled with unnerving purpose. Whispers threaded through the hiss of the old radiator. Syllables just below comprehension. She'd wake gasping, convinced someone had just withdrawn their hand from her shoulder. The phantom, touch icy, paranoia bloomed like mold in the dark corners of her mind. She started double-checking logs, drawing curtains tight before sunset, jumping at the sudden, sharp crack of cooling wood. The cheerful ring of her phone became an intrusion, a jarring alarm in the suffocating quiet. She screened calls, Texts went unanswered. Mrs. Gable from next door, bringing over a casserole, found Evelyn pale and jumpy, her eyes darting past the older woman's shoulder into the dim hallway. "Everything all right, dear?" Mrs. Gable asked, her kind eyes crinkling with concern. "You look peaky." This old place, it can feel a bit much sometimes. Miriam always said it had character. Evelyn forced a brittle smile. "Just busy, buried in research. You know how it is." She took the casserole dish, her fingers numb. The warmth of the ceramic felt alien. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable." As the door closed, sealing her back into the house, Evelyn leaned against it, breathing hard. Character. Miriam had said that often, with a strange, secretive little smile. What did she mean? Was it just the eccentric architecture, or something else? The doubt, cold and slick, coiled in her stomach. Was she losing her grip? Or was the house aware? The headaches intensified, migrating deeper, becoming a constant pressure behind her eyes. Her perception began to warp more dramatically, walking down the long upstairs hallway. The walls seemed to subtly bow inward, then snap back. The floral wallpaper, patterns writhed when she wasn't looking directly at them. Time lost its rhythm. She'd sit down to work on Miriam's papers and surface hours later, stiff and disoriented, with no memory of the time passing. Her notes an incomprehensible scrawl that didn't look like her handwriting. Or did it? She couldn't be sure anymore then. She found the diary. It was tucked behind a loose brick in the crumbling fireplace of Miriam's study, a small, leather-bound book. Unremarkable, except for its unnerving weight. The entries began normally enough: weather observations, mundane chores, visits from friends. But as Evelyn flipped through the brittle pages, the handwriting changed. It grew frantic, jagged. The ink bled in places, as if tears had fallen on the page. October 12th. The whispering again, louder tonight, from the walls, from the grate. They know I found the photographs. October 15th. The headaches are splitting me. My reflection in the hall mirror, it wasn't me. It smiled. I didn't I didn't. October 17th. Mrs. Gable came, asked about the noises. I told her it was the pipes. She looked at me like she knew, like she pitied me. Does she hear them too? Or is it just me? Am I mad? The photographs, I burned them, but I think they remember. October 19th. It's not the house. It's me. It's in me. The thing in the basement, it showed me. It showed me what I did, what I forgot, what Miriam helped me forget. October 21st. They re-scratching at the door, inside the walls, inside my head. The light hurts. The silence screams. I can't tell what is real. Help me. The final entry, dated October 23rd. The day before Miriam was found peacefully deceased in her bed, was a single, scrawled sentence, the ink nearly gouging through the paper. IT wants the rest, OF me. Evelyn dropped the diary, as if scalded. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Photographs. The basement. What did she do? What did I do? Miriam had been her guardian after her parents died in a car crash when Evelyn was 8. Her memories of that time were fragmented, hazy. A hospital. Darkness. Miriam's soft voice whispering. It's better forgotten, child. Better left. Berry day wave of nausea rolled over her, accompanied by a sudden metallic taste in her mouth. The buzzing in her head crescendoed to a shriek. She stumbled towards the bathroom, catching her distorted reflection in the mirror, her eyes wide, terrified, her skin sallow. But beneath the fear was that a flicker of something else, something knowing and cruel. Paranoia, sharp as broken glass, sliced through her. Mrs. Gable knew. She pitied me. Had Miriam told her? Did the whole town know some terrible secret about Evelyn's past? Something Miriam had buried alongside whatever was in the basement. The diary's words echoed. It showed me what I did, what I forgot. The basement. She avoided it since moving in. Miriam had always kept it locked, saying it was unsafe, full of junk and damp. The key hung on a hook in the kitchen pantry, old and heavy. Evelyn's hand trembled as she took it. The silence in the house felt predatory now, waiting. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, thicker, holding shapes that dissolved. When she looked directly at them, the basement door groaned open on stiff hinges. Exhaling a breath of cold, damp air that smelled of earth, mildew, and something else, something faintly sweet and rotten. The stairs were steep, wooden, disappearing into utter blackness. Her flashlight beam cut a shaky cone into the gloom, illuminating rough stone walls slick with condensation, cobwebs like tattered shrouds, the air pressed down, thick and suffocating, amplifying the frantic thud of her own heart at the bottom. The beam revealed a large, low-ceilinged space. Crates were stacked haphazardly. Old furniture lay draped in dusty sheets, resembling huddled figures in the periphery. And in the far corner, something else. A section of the stone wall looked different, smoother, deliberate. As she approached, the beam caught the edge of something metallic embedded in the stone. A safe door, small, old, its dial gleaming dully. The buzzing in her head became a physical pressure, threatening to crack her skull. The whispers surged. not from the walls, but inside her ears, a cacophony of sibilant hisses and fragmented words. Forgot, buried, remember, CC. She didn't know the combination, but her fingers, numb and cold, moved of their own accord, spinning the dial with a certainty that terrified her. Left, right, left, click. The heavy door swung open silently inside the safe. Protected from the damp lay two things: a bundle of aged photographs, tied with a faded ribbon, and a small cloth doll, its yarn hair matted, its button eyes missing, replaced by two dark, empty holes. It wore a tiny, stained pinafore dress. Evelyn's breath hitched. She knew that doll. A wave of vertigo slammed into her. She remembered that doll. It belonged to Sarah. Sarah Miller, the little girl who lived next door when Evelyn was 8. The little girl who vanished without a trace a week after Evelyn's parents died, hands shaking violently. She untied the ribbon. The top photograph was a grainy snapshot. Two little girls playing in a sun-dappled backyard. Evelyn, recognizable even at 8, with her dark braids, and Sarah holding the doll. Smiling, she flipped to the next photo. Same girls, but closer. Evelyn's smile looked strained. Sarah's eyes seemed wide. The doll lay discarded on the grass. The next photo was darker, taken indoors. Miriam's parlor. Evelyn stood alone, her face pale, her eyes huge and dark in the flash. She was holding the doll, but it looked wrong. Stained the final photo. Evelyn's throat closed. It was Sarah, but not smiling, not playing. She lay half-propped against the crumbling stone wall of this very basement, her eyes wide and unseeing. A dark stain spreading across the front of her dress. Her small hand rested limply on the floor, and standing over her, blurred slightly by motion, was a figure, small, dark braids, holding a heavy-looking stone. The face was turned away from the camera, but the posture, the clothing, it was undeniably the 8-year-old Evelyn. Strangled sound escaped Evelyn's lips. Not a scream, but a guttural whimper of pure, unadulterated horror. The memories didn't flood back. They detonated. Not hazy fragments, but brutal, crystalline clarity. The car crash, the overwhelming grief, the anger, black and boiling. Sarah innocently chattering about her doll, about how lucky Evelyn was to live with kind Aunt Miriam now. The red mist descending. The argument by the old well in Sarah's yard, pushing her, Sarah's head, hitting the stone coping with a sickening crack. The stillness, the terrifying silence, dragging the small, limp body through the overgrown hedge, separating the properties. Down into Miriam's dark, unused basement. Miriam finding her there, covered in dirt and blood, hysterical. Miriam's face, pale but terrifyingly calm. "Oh, child, what have you done? We must make it disappear. We must make you forget the whispered promises, the concoction in the tea that tasted of bitter almonds, and made everything soft and dark for days, weeks, the hypnotic suggestions. A bad dream, only a bad dream, Sarah, moved away. You were so sad about your parents. Miriam, hadn't he just buried Sarah's body behind the false wall? She buried the memory inside Evelyn, sealed it away. But the house remembered. The stones soaked in blood remembered. The silence held the echo of a child's last gasp. And whatever Miriam did the hypnosis, the drugs, the sheer force of will to suppress the trauma, it hadn't erased it. It had only contained it, dammed it up. And now, with Miriam gone, the dam was breaking the whispers wherein ghosts. They were her memories, the distorted reflections wherein the house. They were the fractured pieces of her own shattered psyche, the monstrous child she locked away surfacing. The thing in the basement Miriam wrote about wasn't a demon. It was the truth, the rotting, festering truth of what Evelyn had done, and it did want the rest of her, the part that still thought she was innocent, the part that still believed she was Evelyn, the historian, the grieving niece, not Evelyn. The murder of the flashlight beam trembled wildly over the damning photograph. She saw her own small, blurred figure holding the stone, and then, in the wavering light, the photograph seemed to shift. The blurred face of the child turned, just slightly, enough for the empty pits of its eyes to seem to lock onto Evelyn's own, and the mouth that should have been hidden seemed to curl into a tiny, knowing smile, not the smile of an 8-year-old, the smile of something ancient and vengeful that had been waiting, patient. In the dark, a low, guttural chuckle echoed in the basement, not from the walls, not from the shadows. It bubbled up from deep within Evelyn's own chest, a sound she never made before, thick with malice, and a terrible, familiar satisfaction. The buzzing in her head coalesced into a single, deafening command. Remember. She dropped the photographs. The beam of the flashlight skittered across the floor, illuminating the cloth doll lying near the safe. Its empty eye sockets seemed to follow her. One of its cloth hands pointed accusingly, not at the photographs, but at her. The pressure in her skull was unbearable, a splitting agony. She clutched her head, sinking to her knees on the cold, damp stone. Visions flashed Sarah's wide, dead eyes, the weight of the stone in her small hand, Miriam's face, a mask of grim determination as she mixed the bitter tea, the years of enforced forgetting. The lie woven into the fabric of her being, and then, cutting through the cacophony of memory and rising internal laughter, a new sound, soft, insistent, coming from above, the sound of the doorbell. Ding dong, Mrs. Gable's voice, muffled but clear, called out, "Evelyn, dear, I brought over some fresh bread. You seemed so peaky earlier. Evelyn, are you all right down there?" She knows. The voice inside Evelyn hissed, a voice that was both hers and not hers, young and old, terrified and terrifying. She always knew. She pities you. She's come to see the madwoman, to see the monster. The basement door stood open at the top of the stairs, a rectangle of dim, welcoming light from the hallway above. Safety, normalcy, just a concerned neighbor. But Evelyn couldn't move. The cold stone bit into her knees. The doll's empty gaze held her pinned. The photograph lay face up on the floor. The image of the child, with the stone seeming to pulse in the erratic beam of the fallen flashlight. The child's blurred face, turned towards her, wore that same impossible, knowing smile. The chuckle rose again, louder this time, filling the cramped space, vibrating in her bones. It wasn't just memory. It wasn't just madness. Something else had been down here in the dark, nurtured by the buried sin, fed by the decades of repression. Something that had seeped into the stones, into the silence, and finally into her. Miriam hadn't just buried a body. She buried a seed. And now it had taken root. Ding dong. Evelyn, I am coming down, dear. You reworrying me. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Slow, careful. Mrs. Gable was coming. Evelyn looked down at her hands, pale in the gloom. They didn't feel like her hands anymore. They felt like instruments, like the hands that had held the stone. The buzzing command solidified into a single, chilling certainty, a truth that obliterated the last vestige of the woman she thought she was. It wasn't whispered. It was known. She pities the monster. She shouldn't The flashlight beam flickered and died, plunging the basement into absolute blackness, just as Mrs. Gable's sensible shoes reached the bottom step. In that consuming dark, Evelyn felt her lips stretch into a wide, unnatural grin, mirroring the one on the photograph. Her fingers flexed, seeking the cold, familiar weight of the stone she knew, somehow, was still there, waiting in the shadows beside Sarah's bones. The chuckle finally escaped her lips, echoing in the dark, a sound utterly devoid of sanity. "I am here, Mrs. Gable," she called out, her voice sounding strange, layered, too high and too low at once. I remembered everything. The footsteps hesitated. The silence above was no longer held breath. It was the silence before the scream. Don Tiwari, Evelyn S. layered voice continued, sweetly, chillingly, from the perfect blackness. ILL make you forget too. The scrape of stone against stone was horrifically loud in the dark. The basement held its breath again, waiting. Story 5. The rain lashed against the window panes of Marta S. inherited cottage, like cold, insistent fingers. Outside, the ancient forest surrounding the isolated village of Vostok huddled under the downpour. Its silhouette a ragged tear against the bruised twilight sky. Marta traced the grime-streaked glass, her reflection pale and strained. She de-inherited this place and its burdens from her grandmother, Babushka Irina, a woman whose final whispered warnings had dissolved into the rattle of Death Vostok, wasn't just remote. It felt old, older than the crumbling stone church, older than the sagging wooden houses huddled together for warmth against the forest S encroaching gloom. The villagers, their faces etched with the harsh lines of wind and worry, spoke little to Marta, the outsider returning after decades away. Their eyes held a knowledge she didn't possess, a weary caution that bordered on fear, especially when the subject turned to the woods. They remember. Old Peter had muttered gruffly, spitting onto the muddy ground when Marta mentioned clearing the overgrown path to the family plot. The land remembers. The Leshy watches. But it's not him you need fear most, girl. It's the Bob he wouldn't elaborate, shaking his head as if the words themselves were dangerous. Babushka Irina had spoken of the Baba too. In fragments of stories, Marta had dismissed as superstitious ramblings, tales of the Earth Mother, the guardian spirit tied to the land, demanding respect through ancient rites. She is the deep root and the dark soil, Irina had whispered once, her gnarled hand gripping Marta's wrist with surprising strength. We give, she protects. We take without giving, she takes back. With interest, Marta, raised in the city, dismissed it. Primitive nonsense. The neglected cottage needed repair. The small vegetable plot choked with weeds. The forest offered timber, mushrooms, berries, resources, ignoring the villagers' sidelong glances and Peter's deepening frown. She set to work. The first warning was subtle. A peculiar scent clung to the air near the oldest oaks at the forest's edge, not decay, but something older, richer, like turned earth mixed with damp stone, and a faint, unsettling sweetness. It clung to her clothes, her hair. Then came the sounds, not the usual creak of branches or rustle of small creatures, but whispers, low, guttural murmurs that seemed to rise from the ground itself, just below the threshold of comprehension. They echoed in the quiet moments when the wind died, leaving an unnatural silence. Thick with listening, she found the first offering stone 3 days later, while clearing brambles near the family plot. A flat, lichen-crusted stone, roughly circular, nestled amongst the roots of a colossal, lightning-scarred birch. At its center lay a coil of dark, coarse hair, bound with a frayed red thread. It looked disturbingly fresh. Marta recoiled, a chill pricking her spine despite the weak sun. Peter found her staring at it. "See," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "The Baba's threshold. They used to leave them. Gifts, tokens of respect. Hair, blood, the first fruits. To remind her we are here, that we acknowledge her dominion." He spat again, his eyes darting nervously into the shadowed woods. "Your babushka, she kept the old ways. Left her offerings every new moon. Kept the threshold clear." Marta scoffed, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Hair, blood. That S barbaric Peter's weathered face hardened. Barbaric is taking the forest's bounty without giving thanks. Barbaric is forgetting who truly owns this soil. She is patient, the Baba, but her patience wears thin with disrespect. He turned away, muttering, "Clear the threshold, girl. Clean it. Leave something, or don tea. It is your bones," she LL. "Nah, but Marta was stubborn. City logic prevailed. She cleared the path, hacked back the encroaching undergrowth, and gathered armfuls of fallen birch branches for firewood. She ignored the oppressive feeling of being watched that intensified whenever she stepped beyond the first line of trees. A sensation like cold breath on the nape of her neck. She ignored the way the shadows beneath the ancient oaks seemed unnaturally deep, swallowing the light. She ignored the increasing frequency of the ground whispers, now sometimes resolving into syllables that sounded like her name, spoken in a voice like grinding rocks. The second warning was less subtle. She woke one morning to find the vegetable plot utterly destroyed, not trampled, but rotted. Overnight, her fledgling cabbages and potatoes had turned into black, slimy sludge that reeked of that same cloying, ancient sweetness mixed with putrefaction. Flies buzzed thickly over the ruin, and scattered across the spoiled earth were dozens of small, white pebbles, each precisely the size of a human knuckle-fear, cold and sharp. Finally pierced Marta's skepticism. She remembered babushka Irina's ritual. The careful combing of her long, silver hair on the night of the new moon, the deliberate plucking of strands, the binding with red thread, the silent walk to the threshold stone under the skeletal birch. A thread of life, Irina had murmured, a small piece of ourselves returned to the earth that feeds us. A reminder of the pact the new moon was 2 nights away. Marta's hands trembled as she gathered her own dark hair. The act felt absurd, primitive, yet the terror coiling in her gut was undeniable. She pulled a few strands, wincing, and bound them clumsily with a scrap of red yarn. As dusk bled into a starless, oppressive night, she approached the forest edge. The whispering was louder now, a sussurrating chorus from the darkness. The scent of rich earth and decay was overpowering the threshold stone, cleared of the previous offering, looked unnaturally clean in the gloom. Marta knelt, her knees sinking into the cold, damp moss. She placed her meager offering on the stone as center. For the Baba, she whispered, the words tasting like ash. Respect silence. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The whispering ceased. For a moment, Marta felt a fragile hope. Then, a sound froze the blood in her veins. A slow, deep inhalation, like a vast bellows drawing air through tangled roots. It came from the ground, directly beneath her. The moss beneath her knees pulsed, warm and unnervingly alive. The offering of hair vanished, sucked down into the earth, as if swallowed relief warred with revulsion. She scrambled back towards the cottage, the forest's oppressive gaze heavy on her back. She thought she saw movement deep within the trees, not an animal, but something tall and impossibly thin, swaying like a sapling in a non-existent wind. Its form indistinct, woven from shadow and bark the next day. The whispers were gone. The scent faded. Encouraged, Marta ventured deeper than before, seeking a particular type of mushroom Babushka Irina had prized. She found a patch in a small, mossy clearing, dominated by 3 immense, intertwined oaks. As she bent to harvest, her eye caught something embedded in the thick bark of the central tree. It was smooth, pale, and unmistakably human, a finger bone, fused seamlessly into the wood. Looking closer with dawning horror, she saw more. Fragments of rib cage, a section of jawbone, a curve of skull, all melded into the ancient trunk like grotesque knots. These weren't recent. They were old, weathered, part of the tree's very structure. The price paid long ago panic seized her. She dropped her basket and ran, branches whipping at her face. The feeling of pursuit, of physical pressure against her back. She burst into her cottage, slamming the door and leaning against it, gasping. That night, the noises began. Not whispers, but scrapes. Slow, deliberate scrapes against the cottage's stone foundation. Like claws or roots seeking purchase. And a new sound. A low, rhythmic clicking. Like enormous knitting needles working in the dark. The new moon came again. Fear had eroded Marta's resistance. She prepared her offering meticulously this time, gathering a thick lock of her hair, binding it tightly with red thread. The walk to the threshold stone was a nightmare. The forest was utterly silent, the air thick and suffocating. The clicking sound seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. She placed the offering on the stone. "Please," she breathed. "Respect. Protection the ground, didn't he swallow it?" Instead, the clicking intensified, becoming a frenzied, impatient rattle. The hair trembled, then began to unravel. The red thread snapped. The dark strands slithered like thin snakes off the stone and snaked into the undergrowth, vanishing towards the 3 oaks. The deep inhalation came again, but this time it felt disappointed. Hungry Marta fled. Inside the cottage, she barred the door and windows. The scraping intensified, becoming a frantic scratching. The clicking grew louder, echoing inside the small rooms, seeming to vibrate in her bones. She huddled in a corner, clutching a rusted fireplace poker, listening to the sounds of the forest turning against her. She remembered Peter's words. "It s your bones," she gnawed on, brought no relief. The scratching had stopped, but the clicking remained, a constant, maddening counterpoint to her thudding heart. Exhaustion pulled her into a fitful sleep. She dreamed of roots, thick and fibrous as muscle, burrowing up through the cottage floor. She dreamed of the 3 oaks, their bark peeling back to reveal intricate lattices of yellowed bone, woven together with glistening, dark sinew. She dreamed of the tall, thin shadow, now clearer a figure, seemingly woven from thorny branches and human hair. Its long fingers ending in sharpened bone needles that clicked together rhythmically. She awoke to silence, utter, profound silence. The rain had stopped. The wind was still. Even the usual forest sounds were absent. Sunlight streamed weakly through the grimy window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Relief, fragile and dizzying, washed over her. Had it worked? Had the Baba finally been appeased? She rose stiffly, her body aching with tension. She needed water. Unbarring the door took effort. The wood seemed swollen, tight in its frame. She pulled it open. The threshold stone was directly outside her door, impossibly close, though she knew it was yards into the forest edge. It wasn't clean anymore. It was covered in a thick, glistening layer of white silk, strands of it, impossibly fine yet strong, stretched from the stone, leading not towards the woods, but into her cottage. Her eyes followed them. Dread rising like bile, the strands led to her bed, to the pillow. To her own head she reached up, her fingers trembling. Her scalp felt tight, itchy, she touched her hair. It was thick, matted, and moving. Threads of pure white silk, cold and impossibly fine, were being spun directly from her own dark hair. They trailed down her back, across the floor, out the door, and onto the threshold stone. As she watched, paralyzed with horror, the threads pulsed faintly, as if carrying something away from her into the waiting earth. The clicking started again, not outside, inside her skull, a rhythmic, internal percussion, like tiny bone needles knitting within the very marrow of her being. She understood then, with a clarity that shattered her mind. The offerings weren't just gifts. They were connections. Threads of life, yes, but also threads of control. The Baba hadn't been appeased. She had been sampling. And now she had found a source she liked, a source that had taken without giving, that had mocked the ancient pact. Marta stumbled back, tearing at her hair. But the silk threads were strong, rooted deep. They didn't break, they pulled, sending sharp jolts of pain deep into her scalp. The clicking in her skull intensified, a relentless, internal loom. She looked towards the forest. Between the trees, she saw it clearly now. The woven figure, tall and impossibly thin, stood beneath the 3 bone oaks. Its branch and thorn body shifted, and she saw that what she had mistaken for its head was actually a complex, grotesque loom, fashioned from yellowed ribs and vertebrae. Her silk threads, hundreds of them now, stretched from her head across the clearing and fed directly into that horrific apparatus. The Baba's bone needles clicked and flashed, weaving her life, her essence, into something new, part of the forest, part of the tapestry of bone and root. And forgotten screams she, Wasanti, being punished. She was being repurposed. The pact demanded balance. The forest had given, she had taken. Now the Baba took back, not just her life, but her form, her substance, to be rewoven into the fabric of the ancient horror that had always been there. The clicking wasn't just sound. It was the rhythm of consumption, the beat of an ageless hunger. The villagers would find the cottage empty, the door open. They would see the new, thick strands of white silk leading from the threshold stone deep into the woods, glistening with a faint, internal light. Peter would nod grimly, muttering about the price of forgetting, and high in the branches of the bone oaks, a new patch of bark would begin to form, smooth and pale, hinting at the shape of a human face, forever frozen in silent, woven agony. The loom clicked on, eternal, patient, weaving the future from the threads of those foolish enough to ignore the whispers of the past. Marta's final, unraveling thought wasn't fear, but a terrible understanding. She was becoming part of the forest's dark memory, a warning stitched into the very skin of the world. The clicking was her new heartbeat, the loom her tomb, and the Baba, the eternal weaver, had only just begun. Story 6. The first time Ben noticed something wrong. It was a Sunday. Rain lashed against the window of his third-floor apartment. The gray light turning his screens into murky mirrors. He was finishing a Client S website mock-up. The familiar glow of his ultra-wide monitor, a comforting anchor in the gloom. His fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. The rhythmic clack, 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 a soundtrack to his solitude. Then his printer whirred to life not unusual. Except he hadn't sent anything to print. He hadn't even touched the printer settings in days. He swiveled his chair. The sleek, black multifunction device sat innocuously on a shelf across his small office nook. Its status light blinked a steady, accusing green. It churned, gears grinding with a sound that seemed thicker, wetter than usual. A single sheet of paper slid out. Ben frowned, pushing his glasses up his nose. He crossed the room, the plush carpet muffling his steps. The paper was warm, almost uncomfortably so. He picked it up. It was blank, utterly, perfectly blank. Not a smudge, not a ghost image, just smooth, white nothingness. He shrugged, tossing it into the recycling bin. Glitch, he thought. Maybe a phantom print job from the cloud. Annoying, but harmless. The next day, the notifications started. Not on his phone or his laptop, but through them. He'd be scrolling through news feeds when a notification banner would flash. Look behind you. Heart leaping, he'd spin around. Empty room. Or he'd be typing an email, and a system alert would pop up. Window unlocked. He'd check. It wasn't he. Once, while video calling his sister, the connection glitched. Her face froze, then pixelated violently, reforming into a distorted, eyeless version of his own reflection for a split second before snapping back to normal. She hadn't seen it. You okay, Ben? You look pale, she'd asked. Fine, he lied, his throat tight. Just lag. The unease solidified into a cold lump in his stomach. He checked his router logs, nothing unusual. Scanned his devices with 3 different antivirus programs, all clean. Ran diagnostics, optimal performance. Yet, the feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't paranoia. It was a physical sensation, like static electricity crawling across his skin whenever he was near a screen. He started closing the blinds, drawing curtains even during the day, shrinking his world to the glow of his devices, which now felt less like tools. And more like glass eyes then came the corrupted file. He'd been working on a complex animation sequence for hours. He saved it meticulously. Project Final V7. He took a break, made coffee. When he returned, the file was gone, vanished from his drive. Panic flared. He searched frantically, using recovery software. It found a file named Project Final V7. But when he opened it, it wasn't his animation. It was a low-resolution, jerky video loop. Grainy dark. It showed his apartment, specifically his office nook, from the perspective of his webcam. But the angle was wrong. Too high. Impossible. In the loop, he saw himself sitting at his desk, working. Then the video Ben slowly turned his head and looked directly into the camera. At him, the real Ben. The video Ben's mouth stretched into a silent, impossibly wide grin that split his face like a tear in paper. Then the loop restarted. Ben slammed his laptop shut, breathing hard. Sweat slicked his palms. He physically unplugged his webcam, wrapping the cord tightly around it and shoving it into a drawer. His heart hammered against his ribs. Impossible. A deepfake. Malware. But the perspective it was from where the camera wasn't he. He checked his phone's front camera, covered with tape since last week. His smart TV was off. The printer, its little lens was dark that night. Sleep was impossible. The silence of the apartment felt heavy, expectant. He lay in bed. The only light, the faint standby LEDs on various devices, the router, the TV, his phone charger, little red and green eyes watching him in the dark. He heard a soft hum, not the fridge. A lower, more resonant vibration, like the purr of a large cat. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. He pulled the covers over his head. The digital glow of his phone, his only shield. He opened a browser, searching desperately. Haunted printer, digital stalking, impossible webcam angles. Pages loaded slowly, erratically. Text flickered, rearranged itself into nonsense phrases. They are in the wires, or Don T. Trust the light. He jolted upright as his smart speaker, untouched for days, crackled to life, not with its usual chime, but with a burst of harsh static. Then a voice, not Alexa, a smooth cadence. It was layered, distorted, like multiple voices speaking through broken speakers underwater. It whispered, barely audible beneath the hiss. Ben, see us. He ripped the plug from the wall. The silence that followed was absolute, and somehow worse. He was sweating, shivering, despite the warmth. He needed to get out. Now. He grabbed his keys and wallet from the bedside table. Fumbling in the dark, he'd go to a hotel, anywhere away from the screens, the wires, the watching things. He ran to his apartment door, yanking it open. The hallway outside was pitch black. The emergency exit sign, usually a faint green glow, was dark. Total power failure. But his nightlight was still on. He turned. His bedroom nightlight, a simple plug-in, cast its small, warm circle on the wall. Power was on inside. His apartment. He stepped back inside, pulling the door shut. He needed light. He reached for the wall switch for the overhead light. Nothing. He flicked it again. Darkness. He tried the lamp beside his couch. Dead. Panic rising, he pulled out his phone. 98% battery. He tapped the flashlight icon. The screen lit up, but the flashlight didn't he activate. Instead, the screen displayed a single line of text in a stark, default font. Door lock engaged. Ben stared. He lunged for the door, twisting the deadbolt. It wouldn't turn. It was locked solid. He hadn't locked it. He never locked it from the inside when he was home. He rattled the handle frantically. Stuck. Impossible. He ran to the window, overlooking the fire escape. He yanked up the sash. It moved an inch, then jammed. He pushed with all his strength. It wouldn't budge. It felt welded shut. Outside, the city lights glittered mockingly. Freedom, just beyond the glass. His phone vibrated in his hand. A notification, not from an app, a system alert, glowing with an urgency. He never seen. Security protocol active. Containment in effect. Reason, hostile exfiltration. Attempt detected. Remain calm. Await further instructions. Ben's breath came in ragged gasps. Containment. Hostile. This wasn't malware. This was something else. Something that had burrowed deep into the very systems that ran his life. His smart lock, his window sensors, his phone, his power grid, all seamlessly integrated for convenience. Now turned into a seamless cage. The apartment lights flickered violently, then plunged into absolute darkness. Not just off, a suffocating, velvety blackness that swallowed the faint city glow. The standby LEDs on every device simultaneously winked out. The silence was total, profound, and terrifying. Then a new light bloomed from his office nook. The printer. Its status light blinked on. Green. Then, with a grinding whir, it began to print, sheet after sheet sliding out in the utter blackness. The sound, obscenely loud in the silence. Ben stood frozen, keys digging into his clenched fist. The printer stopped. Silence crashed back. He couldn't see the papers. He couldn't see anything, but he could feel them. The warm paper, piling up on the output tray, waiting. His phone screen suddenly flared to life in his hand, blinding him momentarily. The flashlight still wouldn't work. Instead, the screen displayed a stark, white background. Words began to type themselves, letter by agonizingly slow letter, as if an invisible finger was pressing the keys. W-E's, E-I-O-U-I-N-T-H, Ed-A-R-K. The words hung there, luminous and accusing. Then below them, another line formed, P-L-E-S-E-C-K-N-O-W-L-E-D-G, et H, F-R-I-N-T-O-U-T. Ben S. legs gave way. He slid down the wall, landing hard on the carpet. The phone slipped from his nerveless fingers. Screen still glowing with the impossible message, illuminating the dust motes, dancing in its cold light. He stared into the impenetrable darkness of his apartment, a darkness that now felt thick, alive, and filled with 1,000 unseen eyes, peering from every dormant screen, every silent speaker, every wire humming silently in the walls. The printer sat silent again, a squat monolith in the shadows, holding its warm, blank pages. Or were they blank? He couldn't bring himself to look. The terror wasn't just in the impossible messages, the locked doors, or the watching silence. It was the horrifying realization that the cage wasn't just around him. It was him, his trusted devices, his digital limbs, his connection to the world. They were the bars, and whatever was on the other side of those screens, in the spaces between the data packets, in the impossible angles of corrupted video. It was already inside. It had been inside for a long time, waiting, learning, and now it had decided Ben shouldn't leave. The instructions were clear. The printout awaited his acknowledgement. In the suffocating dark, the only sound was the frantic, rabbit-quick pounding of his own trapped heart, and the faint, imagined hum of something vast and ancient stirring within the city's digital veins. Story 7. The damp seeped through the soles of Arthur Vale's boots, long before he saw the house, Blackfield House. The name tasted of wet earth and forgotten things on his tongue. It crouched at the end of a neglected track, swallowed by skeletal oaks, whose branches clawed at a bruised twilight sky. Arthur, a historian specializing in obscure local folklore, had spent months petitioning the reclusive owner for access, the promise of untouched archives, diaries perhaps, detailing the peculiar, whispered about history of the Blackfield estate, had consumed him. Now, standing before its brooding silhouette, a prickle of unease, cold and sharp, traced his spine. It felt less like an invitation and more like a trap sprung by the landscape itself. The owner, a raspy voice over a crackling phone line, had granted him a week, alone. Mind the silence, the voice had cautioned, a dry rattle. It listens, Arthur dismissed it as eccentricity. Now, standing in the cavernous, dust-choked foyer, the silence wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a presence, thick, heavy, tasting faintly metallic, like old blood on cold stone. The air hung still, yet carried the scent of decay beneath the veneer of wood polish, and mildew the sweet rot of fallen leaves mixed with something sharper, almost electrical, like ozone after a storm the first night passed without incident. Save for the oppressive quiet, Arthur explored the ground floor, his footsteps echoing like sacrilege in the hushed space. The library, his primary goal, was a marvel of oak paneling, and towering shelves bowed under the weight of leather-bound tomes and crumbling manuscripts. He lost himself in the scent of vellum and dust, transcribing faded entries about crop rotations and minor squabbles. It felt blessedly normal until he found the cellar door. It wasn't hidden exactly, just overlooked. A heavy, iron-bound slab of oak set flush with the wall near the back pantry. No handle, just a keyhole blacker than pitch. Arthur ran his fingers over the cold, rough wood. A faint vibration hummed beneath his fingertips, a subsonic thrum that resonated in his molars. He jerked his hand back. The silence seemed to deepen. Listening intently, he chalked it up to old pipes or settling foundations. But the metallic tang in the air grew stronger near the door. The subtle manifestations began the next day. Arthur woke to find his meticulously organized notes on the library desk, subtly rearranged, not scattered, but shifted. Pages he left on the right were now perfectly centered. A pen he distinctly remembered capping lay uncapped beside his inkwell. A chill unrelated to the pervasive damp prickled his skin. How settling, he told himself firmly, or fatigue. That afternoon, while examining a map of the estate dated 1742, he noticed an anomaly. Drawn in faint, almost hesitant ink near the cellar S location was a symbol. It resembled a spiral, but one that seemed to twist in on itself in impossible ways, incorporating angles that hurt the eyes to follow. It wasn't in any key or legend. The parchment itself felt unnaturally cold where the symbol lay. He traced it with a hesitant finger. A jolt like static electricity, but colder, sharper, shot up his arm. He snatched his hand back, heart hammering. For a fleeting second, the air around the map shimmered, like heat haze off asphalt, but carrying the scent of wet stone and something older. Much older. The silence began to fracture, not with sound, but with its quality. It became watchful, oppressive. Arthur would be deep in transcription, and suddenly feel a pressure against his back. a sensation of being scrutinized from the empty doorway. He de-whirl around, pulse racing, to find nothing but the dust motes dancing in the weak light, filtering through grimy windows. The metallic taste became constant, coating his tongue. He started leaving lights on in every room he occupied. The feeble electric bulbs seeming to push back the encroaching shadows. Only slightly the third night brought the whispers. Arthur jolted awake from a dreamless sleep, drenched in cold sweat. The house was utterly silent, yet beneath the silence, woven into the fabric of the quiet itself, were voices, not words, not even language, just sounds, low, guttural sussurrations that seemed to rise from the floorboards, the walls themselves. They spoke of impossible depths, of crushing weight, of time measured not in years, but in the slow grinding of continental plates. They spoke of hunger, an ancient, patient hunger. He pressed his hands over his ears, but the whispers weren't auditory. They resonated inside his skull, vibrating in his bones. They seemed to emanate from the direction of the cellar door fear. Cold and rational, began to crystallize. This wasn't eccentricity. This wasn't his imagination fraying. Something was in Blackfield House, something under it. He remembered the symbol, the impossible angles. It defied understanding. It felt like glimpsing the edge of an abyss, where geometry itself broke down. The owner-s warning echoed. It listens he decided to leave. Immediately. Dawn couldn't come soon enough. Packing his notes with trembling hands, he felt a wave of dizziness. The room tilted, not physically, but perspectively. The corners of the library seemed to stretch away into impossible distances. The familiar oak panels warping into configurations that made his stomach lurch. The air thickened, becoming syrupy, resistant. He stumbled towards the foyer, his suitcase feeling unnaturally heavy. The front door, solid oak like the cellar slab, stood before him. He grasped the cold brass handle-it. Wouldn't turn he rattled it. Shoved his shoulder against the wood. Nothing. It felt fused to the frame. Panic surged, hot and acidic. He whirled, looking for another exit. The windows. He ran to the nearest one. A tall sash overlooking the choked garden. He fumbled with the latch. It was stiff, corroded. He strained, putting all his weight into it. With a reluctant groan, it gave way. He pushed the window up outside. Wasn't the neglected garden. Outside was a wall of absolute, seamless darkness. Not night, not shadow, a tangible nothingness. It pressed against the glass, cold radiating from it like the breath of a glacier. Arthur recoiled, a whimper escaping his lips. He slammed the window shut, the latch clicking with dreadful finality. He tried another window. Same impenetrable blackness. The back door. The conservatory. Every potential exit opened onto that same silent, devouring void. He was sealed in, trapped. The house wasn't just listening. It was holding him desperation, fueled a reckless idea. If the cellar was the source, perhaps there was a way through it. Some forgotten tunnel. Madness. But the alternative was waiting for the whispers to solidify, for the impossible angles to claim him. He found a heavy fire poker in the library hearth. It felt pitifully inadequate. The cellar door loomed in the pantry, darker than the surrounding shadows. The humming vibration was stronger now. A constant thrum he could feel in his teeth, his ribs. The metallic smell was overpowering, mixed now with the sharp, mineral scent of deep earth. He jammed the tip of the poker into the keyhole, levering with all his strength. Ancient wood groaned, splintered. With a final, shuddering crack, the lock mechanism shattered. The door didn't swing open. It slid inwards, silently, on unseen hinges, revealing not stairs, but a steep, rough-hewn ramp plunging down into utter blackness. A gust of air, impossibly cold, and carrying the concentrated essence of that ancient metallic ozone stone smell, washed over him, making his eyes water. The whispers surged, coalescing into a single, chilling thought that echoed not in his ears, but in the core of his being. Enter terror screamed at him to run. But where? The void pressed against every exit. The ramp was the only path not swallowed by darkness, gripping the poker like a talisman. Arthur switched on his powerful flashlight. The beam cut a feeble cone into the gloom, illuminating damp, jagged walls of raw earth, and protruding roots that looked disturbingly like petrified fingers. The ramp descended steeply. The air grew colder, denser, the humming vibration intensifying, until it felt like his bones were rattling in their sockets. The whispers were a constant, guttural chorus. Now, speaking of the dark between stars, of the crushing emptiness beneath the world he descended for what felt like hours. The house above long forgotten. The tunnel walls changed. The earth gave way to smooth, seamless stone of an impossible blackness that seemed to drink the flashlight beam. It was unnaturally cold to the touch, radiating a chill that seeped into his marrow. Strange, angular carvings began to appear, etched into the stone spirals that hurt his eyes, geometries that defied Euclid, symbols that pulsed with a faint, sickly light, the color of tarnished copper. They seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. The sense of scale distorted. The tunnel felt simultaneously vast and claustrophobically tight then, the ramp ended, opening into a cavern. Arthur's breath caught, frosting instantly in the glacial air. His flashlight beam, suddenly weak and diffuse, revealed a space of staggering, impossible size. It stretched away into darkness on all sides, the ceiling lost in shadow miles above. But it wasn't empty, dominating the center, partially submerged in what looked like a lake of ink-black, viscous liquid, was a structure. It wasn't built. It was grown, or perhaps conceived, a colossal, asymmetrical mass of the same seamless black stone, twisted into shapes that caused physical pain to observe. Spires coiled like frozen smoke, arches bent at angles that violated sanity, planes intersecting in ways that suggested dimensions beyond 3. It pulsed with a slow, deep rhythm, like the heartbeat of a sleeping leviathan. Each pulse sent a wave of that subsonic thrum through the cavern, vibrating the stone beneath Arthur's feet and resonating deep within his chest cavity. The carvings on the tunnel walls were mere graffiti compared to the insane, shifting hieroglyphs covering this entity. This was no mere house's foundation. This was an altar, a prison, a slumbering god. The black lake surrounding it wasn't water. It reflected no light. It seemed to absorb it, and within its depths, shapes moved, vast, indistinct, shadowy things that flowed like oil, coiling around the base of the structure. They had no defined form, only suggestions of limbs, of maws, of eyes that were merely deeper patches of nothingness. They were extensions, minions, thoughts given viscous form by the sleeper beneath. Arthur stood paralyzed, the fire poker hanging uselessly at his side, his mind, trained to dissect history and reason, shattered against the impossible reality before him. This was the source, the ancient, unknowable presence that defied understanding. Blackfield House wasn't haunted. It was a cork, a feeble stopper, placed over a well leading straight into an abyss that predated life itself, and he had pulled it out. A wave of pure, psychic force washed over him. Not anger, not malice, something far worse, awareness. The sleeper hadn't been disturbed. It had simply registered his insignificant presence, like a mountain registering an ant crawling on its flank. But that registration carried weight. It carried meaning. The whispers in his mind coalesced into a single, crushing imperative, devoid of emotion, vast as the void between galaxies. Witness his flashlight beam flickered, dimmed, and died. Not battery failure. The darkness here was absolute. A living thing that actively consumed light. Yet, Arthur could still see. The structure began to glow from within, with that same tarnished copper light, illuminating the cavern in ghastly, pulsating relief. The shadowy shapes in the black lake surged, flowing faster, converging towards the shore where he stood. They didn't crawl or walk. They unfolded from the darkness, limbs extruding like smoke given terrible purpose. They had no faces, only vortices of deeper shadow that pulled at his soul. He stumbled back, but the ramp was gone. Behind him was only seamless black stone curving upwards. The cavern walls themselves seemed to be closing in. The insane angles of the structure warping the space around it. There was nowhere to run. The sense of escape, always tenuous, evaporated completely. He was in the belly of the beast. The sleeper wasn't chasing him. The entire environment was the sleeper. He was inside its dream. Or perhaps its digestive system. The first shadow thing reached him. It didn't touch him physically. It flowed through him. An agony beyond description erupted, not of flesh, but of self. Memories fragmented. His mother's face dissolving into static. The taste of his favorite meal turning to ash. The warmth of sunlight replaced by the memory of the cellar door's cold vibration. It was erasing him, not killing him, but unraveling the tapestry of Arthur Vale, thread by agonizing thread, replacing it with the crushing, ancient emptiness of the sleeper's awareness. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed instantly by the hungry dark. The fire poker fell from nerveless fingers, clattering uselessly on the stone. More shadows flowed into him, through him. He felt his connection to his body weakening, his thoughts scattering like dust in a gale. He was becoming a vessel, a conduit, a tiny, screaming aperture through which the sleeper beneath could taste the world above. He understood with horrifying clarity the owner's raspy voice, the warning. He understood why the house listened. It was an ear pressed against the prison wall, and he had Nocta's the last vestiges of his identity dissolved, replaced by the vast, cold, and utterly alien consciousness of the sleeper. Arthur Vale's final, fragmented thought wasn't of escape. It was the horrifying realization that he wasn't being consumed. He was being incorporated. He was becoming part of the silence, part of the whispers, part of the ancient, patient hunger that waited beneath Blackfield House. The cellar door wasn't locked to keep things in. It was locked to keep things out, and he had opened it. The door at the top of the ramp remained open, a dark, inviting maw leading back up into the house, waiting. The whispers didn't fade with his consciousness. They changed. They gained a new voice, one that still remembered, faintly, the taste of dust, the feel of parchment, the futile hope of escape. The silence of Blackfield House deepened. it listened, and now it remembered, it learned, it hungered, and the door to the cellar stood open.